Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here.
With Barnet Bain. Good moment, everyone.
Good moment.
Good moment, Freeman.
How are you?
Moment. I'm really well. I'm having a poignant experience today. Very poignant.
Poignant, okay.
Yeah, I was driving in and listening to C-SPAN radio.
Okay.
I love C-SPAN radio.
Do you really?
Yeah. I was listening to President Poroshenko, I can't even say his name, Poroshenko, speaking to the joint sessions of Congress, the president of Ukraine.
Got it.
And it was very, very moving to me. And very powerful to me. And he spoke about dignity. And it lined up...
it's a great word.
It lined up with what is becoming increasingly evident to me, is that we are, as a world, facing, as individuals, certainly personally I am, and as a world I recognize it playing out there, we're facing a crisis of dignity. What does it mean to give dignity, to have dignity, to be dignified, and to treat others with dignity? What is involved in that? And when dignity begins to erode, or it begins to become when it begins to become a transaction or something, when there are agendas that supersede dignity, what happens to us as human beings?
That's a great question.
And he was so moving and so poignant in his representations to the Congress about the state of his nation and the circumstances around this Ukrainian-Russian war.
Right.
And the lack of dignity that is the issue there. The inability to recognize our own selves as being worthy and deserving and of our own personal boundaries, and to recognize and honor the boundaries of others, emotionally, mentally, physically. This is me. This is not Poroshenko, of course, but it was very emotional. I don't want to prattle on about this because we're going to have our guest on, and he can prattle on about this.
I don't know if he'll prattle on about that, but yeah.
I think he'll have a lot to add to...
Right. No, the issue of dignity and the inquiry about what is at stake.
Dignity.
What is at stake when people feel like their dignity is being... compromised. I think in terms of raising a teenager, which you and I have both done, how I've spoken many times about allowing them the dignity of their own choices, even their own mistakes, right? Seeing sort of like, wow, this might not play out well, but not running in and rescuing, not playing the hero, right? And allowing them to go through whatever they need to go through. Now, obviously, there are situations where it's very appropriate to step in.
And just say no because you love them. And that's part of the communication. I allow you to be who you are, and to I allow you to have your own thoughts and your own feelings, and I create a state in which you can explore that environment. And sometimes I will say no because I love you. Yeah, no, that this is a very interesting... it's a developmental practice.
Well, and this is a different way of parenting, or I'm going to stretch this a little bit, of leading. Right? As a parent, am I the authority?
What a clever radio host you are.
Tells my children.
I can tell this is your first barbecue.
What to do, or do I create an environment where they can have some dignity and some choice and find their own way and feel like, you know, then they get to learn and they get to grow and they get to own their own experience.
I wonder how we might steward an environment that would create such a state. Well, this is as good a time as...
That's a good time.
We have with us today on Cutting Edge Consciousness, Dr. Mark McKergow. Applause, applause, applause. We don't have an applause track. We should, Spence. What do you think?
Have a little bell.
Do we have a bell?
Drag the bell in.
So Mark's an international speaker and a consultant, a teacher, a recovering physicist is how he first introduced himself to me. First time I met, he said he was a recovering physicist.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And he certainly has the brain box to
handle that.
I absolutely assure you. So he has developed and hosted many aspects of something called the International Solutions Focus Community, and he's the co-author of 3 related books, including the bestseller, The Solutions Focus. He's also the author of a new book called Host, 6 New Roles. That's roles, not rules of leadership. And
that's a great distinction right there. Roles, not rules.
And I'm thrilled to have you with us today, Mark. How are you?
Hi there, Barnet. Hi there, Freeman. I'm really good, thank you. It's great to be with you, calling in from London today.
It's fantastic. It's really fantastic. Sandy's about to, I guess she just landed in London on her way to Italy, but that's another conversation.
I'll look out for it next time.
Just look out the window, Mark. Just take a little peek out the window and
see if she's walking by.
Make sure she's okay.
So this issue of dignity and the idea of a leader who's very concerned with maintaining an environment where people feel like their dignity is being honored is sort of what I believe we're setting up today to talk to you about.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing about the leader as host. It's a metaphor that I've been working on now for a long time, and about which the book is appearing. Leadership is about relationship, not about individual. That's the starting point. And when you talk about leadership, it makes it sound as if it's all about the leader. And actually, I submit that leadership is about a relationship. And one person is only half of a relationship, of course. And so what we have with the hero, the relationship that the hero develops is the guy who's going to come along and save you, like Superman. And while that's good perhaps in a crisis, it's not a sort of nurturing, sustaining thing. The relationship of the host, and the counterpart of the host, of course, is the guest, is a very, very interesting one. It's an ancient relationship that we kind of, in one way, know all about, and in other ways, we kind of have lost track of a bit, I think, in the modern world.
Well, there's
this position of the person who invites the guest. The host invites the guest to join them in their space.
Yes.
And they both have responsibilities and relationships. And the host's responsibility is, first of all, to provide stuff. And then secondly, to allow the guest to be themselves. It's really, really fundamental.
Yeah. Part of the challenge, I think, and you pointed to this when you used the word Superman, is there's a cultural infatuation with this hero. We see it in, I mean, the superhero, of course, is the sort of archetype, but then we see it, of course, on the cover of all of these business magazines of the guy who came in and saved the day. I mean, we're really infatuated with this narrative. So even if we understand what you're talking about, my sense is it's a challenge to put that down.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I like about the host metaphor, because hosts do a lot of work to set things up and create a space. And then while things are going well, they kind of step into the background and nudge people along. But if there's a crisis, imagine you're in a party, you've invited people around, everyone's having a great time, then suddenly there's a crisis. You know, there's a fire starts or something. People are not going to sit around idly. They're going to look to the host. What are we going to do? And at that moment, hosts step forward. So I think hosts act heroically sometimes, but very much when the context demands it of them. And so they're good at stepping forward and making the running, and then they're also very good at stepping back and allowing other things to happen in the space which they've created. And I think that is the dance of the host that is such a rich metaphor and an exciting way of thinking about leadership practice and the relationships we develop.
I have a personal experience that I want to share for your feedback. I know a woman who is a leader of a very, very large organization, and she is someone possessed of an uncommon sense of herself. And she's very vulnerable. She has a very quiet power, very, very capable. And she does not, in her organization, seek to fix people, but she is very solution-oriented. I know that's certainly great part of your work. She looks more in the affirmative model. She looks for what is working amongst people and encourages that. And what I see constantly whenever I'm around her is that by her presence, she lifts environments. The states of a room change by virtue of her presence alone, whether or not she says anything.
How's she showing up?
People function better. People behave better. I know I myself, it's not that I'm thinking I need to be on my best behavior. It's not a performance. But the quality of how people interact with each other, how people operate, elevates.
She sounds like a great host.
In her presence. Precisely. She is a great host and a great leader. And I'd like you to comment on that if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so I think hosts can create this space around them. And you're right, it's not about a lot of what they do that's about jumping up and down and making a lot of noise and stuff. It can be very quiet. And hosts are very, very interested in their guests. It's good hosts.
Oh, that's a good point.
And so it really pays. If you're thinking like a host, you go around being interested in other people. And that immediately puts you into a different relationship than the guy who's saying, I'm going to turn the company around and you're going to do what I say. Yeah? There's the old film, The Italian Job. From the 60s with Michael Caine. There's a wonderful
and the minis.
Where Michael Caine says, right, to succeed in this job, in this robbery, we're all going to have to work as a team. And that means you do exactly what I tell you.
Right.
And, of course, sometimes that's the kind of thing we see. And occasionally that's required. But mostly it's about the kind of relationships and space you get from being interested in other people, from connecting other people together, introducing people to each other in ways that create new relationships, new possibilities, as well as the act of joining in, too, of being there. A host has to show up. That's thing one.
So there is another model for a host as well, and I'm looking to you for this because I know you fairly well, and our listeners most of them don't know this unless they're listening to podcasts in Europe. But Mark is a pretty formidable jazz musician and a sax player and a clarinetist and. So I've seen you perform live, and there is a kind of cha-cha-cha that you do when you're fronting a band. And that seems to me is hosting in action, because there is a groove that you lay down, and that group goes with you there. And then there's a sort of spaciousness where you step back and they do their thing, and then you step in and it takes a left, and then you step back. So there is it's an astonishing show and tell for what you're speaking about.
Absolutely, and jazz particularly. Is
I was going to say that. I was going to say quality in jazz. That's especially again this space that something's going to come in and fill.
Yeah,
it's so much what jazz.
You're really
is about.
You're really hosting your fellow players, plus you're hosting the audience. You're hosting an entire milieu.
And the thing about this is everyone offers their own sound to something that emerges, but the spirit of sharing and collaborating and contributing, for me, in a really amazing jazz performance, the flow element is exhilarating.
And there are roles there. There is a leader. There is a host, and sometimes the host trades off, but there's a host. And when things go south, that host steps in and redirects it. So I've seen this in action, modeled by you, particularly, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Good jazz is a lot about listening, and good leadership is a lot about listening too. And you're right, it's about giving people their space, their voice. There's time when it's good to put that voice forward. There's other times when it's good to go back and back other people. And jazz, of course, is about improvisation. And I think leadership is also about improvisation. This is where we have the distinction between rules and roles that you mentioned at the top. The book is called Host, 6 New Roles of Engagement. And that's, of course, different to rules of engagement that we may all have heard about before.
I love
A rule is something you do and you follow all the time, something you have to do all the time. A role is something you can step into and then step out of. And it's a very, very flexible model. It's about what needs to happen next, how am I going to step into the right role to do that, and then how am I going to step out of it again and then and leave other things going on. So for me, hosting always includes an element of uncertainty, because however well you plan your event as a host, your dinner or your ball or whatever it is, there's going to be unexpected stuff happening.
And that's the good news. Now, here's
the bad news.
Here's the bad news. We have to take a break. But
wait, there's good news.
Yeah, there is news.
We'll be
come back. Yeah, they're good. What I want to ask, I love this, by the way, and I don't necessarily want to conclude this part of the conversation where, I love the jazz analogy too, by the way. It's just fantastic. Where we talk about sort of what wants to emerge and creating the space for that, and the attunement, the keen listening, and all of these qualities are really brilliant. So I do want to talk about that. But I also want to bring up, just for myself, I have a pattern where I find myself trying to play the hero. I think it's a part of the conditioning of this sort of, again, the Superman thing. So when we come back, I kind of want your advice, if you don't mind. I'm going to use your expertise to
on whether the S on his costume
that's right.
should be swoopy or should it be. But we'll
right cover back. All that after this break here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
So you're ready for the Superman piece, everyone? Welcome back. This is Barnet. I'm here with Freeman. And
playing the role of Superman.
In the role of Superman. And Mark McKergow on the line with us from London. So, Freeman, let's go right back to your superhero.
Let me set it up. So I understand that the orientation is towards what's right, rather than focusing on the challenge or the problem. So I'm going to just use myself as a guinea pig. In fact, you know, this was beautifully illustrated. I did Scott Cody's Art of Leadership Mastery program, and I remember there was a moment where my team elected me leader. That was the way we always did things. The team elected me leader, and I stepped in and I made a mess of it. And in the debrief of the exercise, Scott said to me, so what happened with you? And I said, well, I was trying to fix it. I was trying to figure out how to fix it. And he says, is that what you think they elected you leader for? And I said, well, of course. I mean, you know, they said they made me the leader, and then I got in, tried to fix this. Isn't that what you do? And then he pointed out how much talent I had on my team. And he says, don't you think that's the resources that you could have utilized to come up with solutions? Didn't cross my mind. And I recognized in that moment, and I have since, that I have this tendency to want to play the hero. Right? Versus being able to sit back and or facilitate solutions. So I guess my question to you, Mark, is I understand that the intention is to organize towards what's right. But what do you do with a guy like me who, you know, keeps tripping on this wanting to play the hero thing?
Kryptonite.
Well, I'd invite you, Freeman, to think about, imagine yourself as a host. Put your host hat on. You've invited people around to your house for a meal or a party or something at some stage, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, so put your host hat on for a minute. Now, you're going to be the leader of this group, and there's a problem to solve. There's nothing wrong with having a problem to solve. But think with your host hat on now. You're in the room. The people are going to be arriving in a few minutes to start working on this thing. You're the host. What are you going to do first? In the 5 minutes you have before they arrive, what are you going to do? What are you going to think about? What are you going to take action on?
So there's two answers. One is the conceptual answer, which is how I would like to show up, and I do sometimes show up this way, okay? But then there is the default setting where I go into fixing, and I go into, and I'm not proud of this, I go into ordering people around. I'm not proud of that, but I learned to do that. That's the leadership model I came up in. So I understand the right answer, and I can give it, but I tend to default to telling people what to do. Now, the only thing I can think to do in that moment is to back off, apologize, and try to keep coming back to this sort of new road, if you will, this new operating system, knowing that I tend to default to the one.
That's exactly what you thought you were going to hear, right, Mark?
But, sure. But
yeah, I'm predictable.
But so let's think about this then. You're good at ordering people around.
It's a bad habit, but yes.
He's good at it.
How can you order people around? How can you take the initiative, but in a hosting way?
Oh, that's a good distinction.
So when people come into your house, you don't say, well, what would you like to do with your coat? You say, please put your coat over there, or something.
Yeah.
Please take your shoes off.
Please give me your coat. And now, why are your projections for the next quarter off by 4%?
Please come through to this other room. There's drinks here, and let me introduce you to Joe over here, who I think you'd get along with very well. You have something in common here. So none of this is about sitting back and being very facilitative, but it's about taking positive actions that welcome people in, that acknowledge who they are, that are to do with connecting them with each other, and starting to assess the resources that you have in terms of the skills, the qualities, the personalities, who are going to help work on the problem. And then when you're going to start working on the problem, think of it as if you're calling people around the table to dinner. You ask them to sit down, you bring the problem out, and that's like the food. And who gets to eat the food first when you're the host?
The guests.
The guest.
Absolutely.
Right? Who gets to eat the food last?
Me.
Right. And this is a really fundamental thing. Hosts eat last. Leaders eat last, as Simon Sinek has observed recently as well. And this is a really good way. If you think of yourself as a host, you can be asking people really tough, really hard questions that engage them, rather than trying to jump in and effectively eat the food first, just to show how good it was. That would be really strange hosting behavior, wouldn't it? No, I'm going to eat all this food. It's really delicious. You should try some.
And I made it. I think that's a big piece of it, isn't it? We eat the food first because we made it, and there's a certain desire often that kind of leadership is sort of an alpha personality, look at me leadership.
I think the adjective is gracious. So what's striking me in this moment, I've not used this language ever before, is a gracious leader. I would like to be a gracious leader. I aspire to be a gracious leader.
Right. And I think this act of being firm and yet giving people that dignity, that acknowledgement, that chance, that airtime, that opportunity to shine and contribute. This is something that hosts do all the time. Nelson Mandela, God bless him, was a fantastic host leader in many ways. He was a tough man, and he knew how to play politics hard, but he was a fantastic host as well. And there's a lovely story when he was imprisoned after his treason trial, taken off to Robben Island. After 8 weeks, his lawyer finally gets permission to go meet Mandela. Lawyer is white. Mandela is black, of course. And the lawyer goes into the meeting room on Robben Island, and Mandela is escorted in, surrounded by 8 white guards, like forming a box around him, and they all kind of march in together. And the box of guards with Mandela sort of comes to a stop, and the lawyer is shocked and appalled and has never seen anyone being corralled in quite this way before. And it's Mandela, who's the prisoner here, who breaks the silence and says, George, forgive me. Allow me to introduce you to my guard of honor. And then he has promptly introduced his lawyer to each of the 8 guards by name in Afrikaans, which he'd started learning at that point. And the guards were completely confused. They sort of say they all shook the lawyer's hand and said hello politely and stuff, which they weren't supposed to do and they'd never done before. But here they were being put into this context of this man knows who I am, he knows my name, he knows about me, he's introducing me to this other man, I should say hello. So it's a wonderful example of thinking like a host even when you're not a host, and changing the environment and changing the relationships right away, but in a very firm way. If he tried to do that in a kind of half-hearted, well, I'm not sure way, it wouldn't have worked. You have to do it in the biggest, strongest, most confident, and yet gentle and gracious way.
Yes, it has to be embodied. You can't fake that. You can't fake it, but you can show up. We can all show up at the edge of our own capacity, and this sort of threads me back to where we began, talking about dignity. One can't fake this because you have to have a sense of your own dignity, your own boundaries, the lines that you will and will not cross for yourself and with others. You really have to have a sense of that in order to operate at its edge and then show up as a host in any kind of effective way. And for some, the measure of that will look very different than it will for others. We do it at the edge of our own capacity.
Absolutely, Barnet. And this metaphor is one that appeals differently to different people. One group to whom it appeals very nicely, in my experience so far, is women. A lot of women don't want to be the hero, but they feel instantly at home when asked to be a host.
It's a great point.
And that really helps to connect with a leadership style that speaks to them in a way that, incidentally, the servant leadership model, which I'm a big fan of, but hasn't caught on enough in recent decades. Servant leadership has its own interesting difficulties around this, because the relationship with the servant is the master, and the accountabilities get unclear, and so forth. So I'm looking with host leadership to kind of build on that idea of service. Yes, hosts serve, but they also occasionally take control when it needs it, and they're very aware of this dance of stepping forward and acting, and stepping back and allowing things to happen. And the different ways that you can do that, this is all part of what the book's about.
So what a thought that comes to mind with the servant leadership model, again, so much of this is against the backdrop of our conditioning, right? There's these ways that we associate certain things, just like my pattern of feeling like the leader is the guy who has to know the answer versus someone who can draw out the answer. The challenge, I think, with servant leadership is a way in which there's a self-sacrificing element, maybe, that's not healthy. I mean, we see this in business today where it's this kind of, leader going down with the ship. I'll stay, I'll work the 16-hour day, and I'll be the guy who's there in the morning and doesn't leave until the end. And so there's a way that people can maybe get kind of martyred about playing the servant. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just what the thought that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought that servant leadership is about stewarding things, of course, and stewarding for the next generation and looking after the organization so it can be passed on, which is an excellent idea, of course. And then if the organization's facing a challenge which is existential, which could kill it, then suddenly that it's not as easy as stewarding it for the next generation. We have to save it this week or something.
Different skill set.
Maybe a different kind of.
Well, and just the association with the language. Look, language is so important. And while the word, I everything you said about servant leadership and as a steward, I get completely, again, conceptually. But we all bump up against our own little associative ways that we're processing things, right? So when we say servant leadership, oh yeah, I like that. So in one day we're liking it as a concept from the steward perspective. In the next day, when we're trying to live it out, we slip into this sort of, distorted leader context, and things go terribly wrong, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and that's where having, a firm foundation on different choices, different possibilities, can be a really, really useful thing.
And I'm just saying also that I love the host. So where you were saying before, servant leadership hasn't really caught on, I'm with you on that. And I kind of have a sense of why it hasn't. And I'm loving the host, because this analogy, especially for women, and so this is where I'm pointing that I think you're on track 100%.
Let me jump in for a sec with a thought. I mean, it might be that servant leadership has not caught on fire because it involves, it requires having an intimacy with vision and dreaming. It requires a great vision to be a steward. I mean, We have a president right now in President Obama, who, whatever one thinks of him, however appealing he is and however smart he is, I don't sense that he has much of a vision. I'm not saying this as a better or less than. I'm not suggesting that I can think of anybody else who might have another great vision, but certainly he doesn't have a great vision to steward. He's really just trying to keep, like the Dutch boy with his finger in the dike, he's just trying to keep the whole thing from collapsing, but there is not a great vision. And then when we look at servant leaders like, for instance, Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa is a really great example. It's probably low-hanging fruit for this example. You really do have a sense of somebody who has a great vision and a bunch of supporting dreams in order to support people in realizing that future. You have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is where the flexibility comes in of hosting. So the host has an idea of the thing that they're trying to do, the long-term hope, the intention, the aspiration, the dream. And then I think hosts combine that with short-term action. And we have a piece in the book, a whole chapter called The User's Guide to the Future, which is a new piece of work that I'm putting forward, which is how are you going to use the future right now? And there are some bits of the future that are more useful and other bits which are less useful, in my view. So the distant future of the dream, the hope, the aspiration, the intention is really, really useful. The small next steps that we take right now are really, really useful. And in the middle of that, there's the kind of middle future. And that's the bit that I call ant country, because it's too complex to work out.
Ant country?
Yeah. There's a metaphor of an ant's nest where the ant's nest kind of works, but you don't know where any individual ant's going to be at any given moment. Mm-hmm. It's a complex systems idea. Mm-hmm. And the thing with ant country is just don't worry about it, right? Because it's too far away to calculate and not far enough away to be interesting.
So it's a chaos piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So all the stuff's moving around in this middle future, and we can't figure it out.
Here comes the physicist.
Yeah. So this is my PhD
theory.
was in self-organizing systems.
Yes, we can smell it coming.
Yeah. So we have this, but people often want to make a plan that will take me from A to B, like all the way.
Yeah, if I'm going to go from Monday to Friday, then I have to shoot right through Wednesday, and life doesn't work like that, does it?
Life doesn't work like that. You need to know. You want to know where you want to be Friday night in terms of what you want to have done. You want to have a great plan for Monday morning, and then see and evaluate and adjust. And be
supported by life, and be supported by your team if you're a host.
And it's
leader.
jazz. Life is jazz, you know? If you start planning... I was a professional actor, and of course Barnett's made many movies, and so we often use the analogy of acting and the idea that, you know, good acting is about listening, as you mentioned earlier. It's about stepping into the not knowing and discovering in moment to moment to moment. Look, there's still a script. There's still a beginning, a middle, and end, and we have to hit all those points. But to the degree where we're playing the outcome, in acting we call it indicating, it's bad acting. So there's something about the discovery, even if it's kind of something we've been through before, but that allows it to become nuanced and rich and meaningful. And I think that's life. But I think it's especially applicable in this higher level of doing business.
Absolutely, and the host, of course, knows all about this, because you know you want to have a successful party or a successful evening. You put what you can in place, and then you know that there will be upsets and unexpectedness happening, and you just work with it.
It's beautiful.
And that doesn't mean that your initial plans were bad. It's just, as you say, it's life. It's jazz. It's immersion.
And we put down our hero periodically. All right. End of the.
First of all, the book, Host, 6 New Roles of Leadership by Dr. Mark McKergow. That is available now, is it not, Mark?
It's published on 6th of October, so very nearly available now.
Well, for many, it's available now because this is broadcast and podcast.
Right.
So both and, you know, this is chaos in action here.
So it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle. 6 new roles of engagement for teams, organizations, Communities and Movements. And I should also acknowledge my co-author Helen Bailey in this as well. So, but the main title of the book is one four-letter word, host.
And perhaps a website address for those of our listeners who would like to learn more about your work.
Absolutely. Hostleadership.com. That's hostleadership.com. We have lots of stuff there, resources. There's also a community element to the site, so if people want to get involved in conversations around the hosting and leading metaphors, very welcome to come and join us. That's all free to sign up to. And also we're on Twitter at The Host Leader.
Great.
At The Host Leader.
And we would like to host you if you find yourself in the LA area in studio. So please let us know if you travel to the States, specifically to the LA area, because we'd love to have you back.
I would love to join you, Freeman. Thank you very much indeed. It's been great being with you.
Excellent. For those of you listening, we invite you to stay tuned because we'll be back after these messages here on Cutting Edge Consciousness.
Welcome back to Cutting Edge Consciousness, thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
And we're back here on Cutting Edge Consciousness. Freeman Michaels here with Barnet Bain.
Indeed. So I appreciate Mark's distinctions between hosting and servanting, and that there comes a point in which we become nimble enough to adjust and to dip and weave and accommodate all these very different styles. But you have to start someplace.
Look, this show is a direct analogy. We're co-hosts of this conversation, and we've talked about it for 4 years now, how we're doing as hosts. In moments, we feel like we want to be the expert, not helpful.
No,
it's like the hero game.
Yeah.
In moments, we are, too passive, and then, the conversation isn't really that engaging because someone's just reporting on their story. And so we're in the middle of it.
It's tricky.
This is, and there is...
It's fun, though.
It can be exhausting sometimes. So, look, there's lots of nuances, but we're really familiar with this hosting thing at this point, Barnet. This is what we do, so...
Okay, we're familiar with it. Thanks for listening, everyone. That's this. We're going to wrap this show.
No, we're not going to wrap this show up. We have more hosting to do.
We do. We have much more hosting to do. Hoisting.
Which means
that's better than hoist leadership.
Yeah.
It's when you really get out ahead of yourself.
I want to pull out some of the qualities in the show, in our direct experience, that are part of this. One is that there's a premise for what we're doing. There's an intention behind it. And even when we invite people to the show, we invite them into a conversation. And something that happened in the conversation is gracious leader. Never used that word before. Maybe there's a book called Gracious Leader. I have no idea. But for me, that was organic. It was in the moment. It was something that came out. And whether it was a profound point or not, I don't know. Some are more profound than others. That's the other thing. You don't get to even Monday morning quarterbacking say, it's so interpretive. I mean, we get so much feedback from various people about what they think the show is. And you and I have had to stay steady in, well, what are we hosting here? What are we hosting? Versus trying to shift it and make it so that, I don't know, more people like it, or that it fits a certain formula that someone else created. So it goes back to what you were speaking about in the person you were talking about. It's like they have a self-awareness and they have a sense of what they're up to. And then people then like to splash in that water. They like to come in their space, and play because they're clear enough about what the invitation is that they're showing up in the room with, right? That's powerful. And again, we've played at this.
I'm silent. Not because I disagree, but because as you're speaking, I am remembering a moment very recently that illustrates precisely your point, but it was an uncomfortable illustration. It was an uncomfortable realization for me. You were speaking about being embodied in such a way that your leadership has authority. It's authoritative without it being dominating or controlling. It has an authority from the inside out. And so what dinged in me was a conversation that I had in the last couple of days, in which I was not authoritative, and I did not, I wasn't coming from that place, but I was unsure of myself and insecure about my desires around it. And so I was showing up in a way that that was really not steadfast, authentically
That's
steadfast.
a great word.
And that only just dawned on me with both exhilaration and horror.
The piece of this, which we started with, is dignity. So if there's a dignity imperative here, you know, that everyone involved in this conversation gets to maintain their dignity. That, and I can be insecure and overwhelmed, and all of that, you know, is okay too. You know, it's, again, I keep going back to the act.
Well, let's look at what dignity is.
Yeah, please.
Maybe it would help to sort of pull back some of the layers of what dignity, I'll share what dignity means to me.
Please.
Dignity has components to it. One is self-respect. And by self-respect, I'm referring to being aware of what my emotions are and feeling them and release and letting them go, but being aware of them so that they're not driving me unbeknownst to me. So the dignity is the ownership of my emotions. It's also the it's a self-appreciation, a self-respect, a self-appreciation, a self-trust that I do trust myself. It's also a self-awareness. I am aware of my thinking and my belief structure sufficiently, not perfect, but I'm aware, and of my values. And I'm also aware of my boundaries, which for me is the weak leg here. I'm not always aware of my boundaries. I'm not aware of when I allow others to inundate me, or when I self-abandon myself, as I did, as you reminded me that I did a couple of days ago. So those are components of dignity, and when all of those cylinders are firing, then I am in touch with my dignity, and when I'm in touch with my dignity, I can honor and respect somebody else's dignity.
Absolutely.
But if I'm not in touch with my own self-respect, if I'm not honoring my own emotions, not in a way that I'm throwing them all over you like throwing eggs at somebody, but I'm aware of my emotions, and so that I can have a rapport with them, so I'm not smearing somebody else with all of my stuff, my junk. I have my own dignity, and I can now appreciate and respect somebody else's dignity and not dump my stuff or manipulate or dominate and not invade somebody else's emotional space or personal physical space or
but that becomes very intentional. So
dignity is an intentional matter. Dignity
absolutely
is not an unconscious operation.
No. And the intention, the vision, I kind of consistently see vision as intention as two sides of the same coin. That vision is a bigger sense of what I'm up to creating or what I'm pursuing.
As an actor, you know that intention is to get from this side of the door to that side of the door.
Right.
Vision is to get through a life or a stage of life or with dignity. Mm-hmm. I mean, a vision has stakes to it.
Yeah.
A vision is not just, I want to paint my house. That's a dream.
Right.
There's stakes to it. So I'm pushing back on your conflation of intention and vision.
Yeah, no, actually it's a great distinction. I don't know if it's, I think I agree with you 100%. The piece for me is that my pattern tendency, like wanting to be the hero, wanting to save the day, wanting to control, comes along too. We've said that a lot on this show, but I mean, heck, it's apropos, and we'll say it again in this moment, that it's really about I get that part comes along too. One of my revelations, it actually goes way back. So getting nervous before a performance and feeling like I might get thrown and making the fear wrong. I have this story in my head that if I was a really good actor, I wouldn't be scared going out there. Of course, someone told me the story of Henry Fonda, and like he vomited before every performance. I don't know if that's true or not, but he had real stage fright. He just didn't make that wrong. He just didn't make it wrong, you know. And if he vomits, he vomits. It's still the imperative is I'm going to go out there and do this thing because I love it and it's what I'm committed to doing. And I may vomit along the way too. It isn't held so tightly as how it has to look. So what that gave me permission in the moment was I can be scared and still go do what I'm going to do. And then what happens remarkably is the fear is not so overwhelming. It's still there. So the same thing is true here, that we're not making. So if the intention or the vision, both, but the sense of, you know, I want to, what we want to create is a conversation. And you and I got really clear about what this was several times and had to redefine it a few times, then everything organizes around that, right? And it will go off track, and it will have moments where, you know, we're not in our most hosting, you know, role. But that's okay. We go from
host to toast. We do toast leadership.
We go from roles to rules real fast.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Toast leadership is 6 new rules.
That's right. But we made, so again, just to weave it all in, we made that part of this conversation. You know, we made not knowing part of this conversation. So, you know, it's a beautiful day when we can kind of go, wow, okay, this is cool. It totally fits. This is what we've been doing. You know, we've been hosts. That's what we're called. We're co-hosts. What are we hosting? Are we clear about what we're hosting? Do we create the environment? You know, do people, you know, are we getting feedback that people are enjoying the experience, that new things are going to come out of these conversations for us, for our guests, and for our listeners, right? And I think that we do. I mean, I'm committed to that. So there we have it.
That's exciting. I have a whole lot that I want to say about it. And unfortunately, this thing always happens when we get right to the end of the show. But
we have a couple minutes.
So, you know, we were talking before about states. And what you're speaking about is this is a laboratory for us to explore state making. Not a state, but state making.
Resonant energy.
Resonant energy, a quality of energy, a quality of thinking and feeling, a quality of emotional experience that is mixed in a cocktail. So all of these energies are thrown into a cocktail. That cocktail is a resonance, and those resonances are generative. And we have, I'm calling them states, and the reason I'm calling them states right now is because there was, when we are in states, not only are they generative, but we have access to different imaginative qualities, different memory experiences, different creative abilities. There's a really famous, and it's so famous that I can't remember it, but there's a famous study that was done in England. Mark, if you're listening, you could check this out if you're interested. It was done about college kids, and they were measuring. They were talking about memories, and then they had adult beverages. They were all served alcohol. And then they went back and they reviewed a bunch of memories again, and there was a whole bunch of new memory and a new sense of possibility, a new sense of creativity. And these memories, they existed before the alcohol, but they were memories that from previous alcoholic states. Previous, I'm saying this so poorly, but so what the science came away with is that, you know, when these kids had something to drink, they could remember stuff from other times when they had something to drink, and they also were firing entirely new neural nets. Well, these state-specific memories, there's also state-specific learning, state-specific creativity. Artists and creators often play music, and they attempt to to create altered states, that because they understand that this facilitates a different relationship with the world. And host leaders are also and co-host radio people are also attempting, they're committed to creating a state. And that state is an induction field. It is a resonance in which possibility unique to that state can occur.
And I'm going to weave this in, even though we're at the
whatever it was that I was said. It made perfect sense to me.
Yeah, no, I got it. I like it. The database or the intellect, the kind of internal information is works when things are strictly bound. But when you're a host, when you're working with chaos, when you're working with the unknown, there's an intelligence that we tap into, that we have access to. This is what you're talking about.
That's right. States are pure intelligence.
Yeah. And in my life, to the degree I can get out of my head using acting language and be in more of a state, all kinds of intelligence opens up, not just I can think of smart things to say. Sure, of course, that comes in. But all kinds of other things come in as well. Because
these intelligence, cognition, logic and reason, the brain hard drive, is a state. But it is not it is a state and it is an intelligence, but it is not the only model. It's not the only expression of consciousness. There are other expressions, and I'm using consciousness and intelligence here interchangeably. But that is not the only expression of it. Our conditioning is to believe that smarty-pantsness is the only expression of consciousness. But there are infinite expressions of consciousness, and we can learn to calibrate to them. But
and we can go.
One of them is the time
cutting edge
expression. The cutting edge. So we have come.
We're on the cutting edge of consciousness. Yeah, so you'll have to come back to us, and we'll keep muddling through this.
We're through for today, folks.
Thanks for listening.